Hey, folks, we're back, and it turns out that open source isn't free after all, and there is a cost in running all the infrastructure to support it. But it turns out that a lot of folks are using it in a way that, shall we say, is fundamentally inefficient and not realizing that they are running up the cost of using that infrastructure in a way that might threaten the existence of open source one day. But I'm going to let Brian Fox, CTO of Sonatype, explain here in this little video segment we did at the Open Software Summit last week.
We've modernized our practices to the point where all of these open source projects, everything is dependent upon, CI/CD in the cloud, right? And GitHub Actions. GitHub, sponsors lots and lots of machine and compute time for GitHub projects to run their builds, and lots of other companies do it too. Sonatype, we run the Maven Central repository. We pay for the bandwidth and all these things. But I think people they don't recognize the underlying cost because all these companies are bearing that burden, right? And so it's led to this sort of mentality, the gluttony mentality of it's all free. And so I'm just going to run my build as many times as I possibly can. Every commit, I'm going to run a pretend release. And so what I'm seeing when I really look at this is I'm seeing really just, frankly, irresponsible consumption by individuals and companies, big trillion-dollar companies that really should know better, right? And are just eating up all of the resources that are causing every company that has to donate this stuff.
All right, we're back. So, Mitch, to Brian's point, is this becoming a larger issue, or is it a narrow set of projects and maybe only the smaller projects that this is going to affect? But it does seem that best practices are not being followed consistently, shall we say.
Well, I was lurking in the background or the side of that video, listening to you guys talk about it during the open source summit. It was pretty interesting. It's not like a theme or a cause that's bubbling up and people are getting kind of building steam around it and some momentum, but it does raise the question of, are there good practices in being considerate of the resources that you're using? The problem with when something's free, it's free whether you use it once or free use it 1,000 times an hour. If it's free like that, then you use it for whatever you want. Not really thinking about, well, if everybody does this, then there's resources at Sonatype or at Docker or GitHub or wherever this is suddenly are now responding to a whole bunch of requests that isn't really needed for that. And they've got to start putting limiters and governors in place. So I don't know that it's a rampant problem. Maybe it is, but I think Brian was responding to it because he's digging into what they're doing at Sonatype and the resources that are being acquired, and why is somebody hitting, our repositories this fast or this quickly, this many times per hour? Do they really using that many build processes, or just gone amok?
Not just somebody. $1 trillion tech company is what he said.
Yes, he did. He didn't name any names, but there's not too many $2 trillion tech companies, right?
Well, in my best Dr. Richard Stallman voice, pity.
I was going to mention Stallman.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Pity these poor people who can't make more money off of open source. If it's open source, it's open source, right? We've seen this. Mitch and I've seen this. Kate, you were around then. So were you, Chris. Right? Look, I remember when Ron Guler and Renaud Jason said, everybody's getting rich using Nessus, and Nessus is in everybody's scanner, and we're not going to keep it open source anymore.
It's free, but it's not that free.
Right. It's free as in beer, not as in freedom. And so they took Nessus out of open source. Marty Ratch said, well, you can still use the Snort engine, but you're going to have to pay for those rules, the syntax rules. This is, if something is open source and you make a decision to open source something, people can use it to the letter of the license. And if that disagrees or conflicts with your open source business model, then don't have an open source business model. I have a ton of respect for Brian. I have a ton of respect for Sonatype. But when you put something out there, you can't cry if people are using it pursuant to the license that you put it out under.
But to that point, Alan, I'm kind of the same mind of, is it just, this is a problem, the sky is falling? And I'm not saying Brian is being that, dramatic about it. But on the other hand is, of course, people are going to abuse it and overuse it, maybe intentionally, maybe not at times. And if you're going to provide a resource that you're paying for, you're going to have to manage it. And you'll have to put some limits on it, some governors or whatever, or not. I mean, that's just a cost of you hosting that open source, you providing those servers, those repositories, et cetera. So it's part of it. It isn't, you don't get to get open source because you just provide code. There's other parts of it you have to support as well.
All right, I'm going to disagree with this on multiple points here. One is, we're not talking about open source, whether it's open source or not. We're just talking about whether or not I need to provide the infrastructure to host that open source project, and I may not be under any obligation to do that just because I made something available as open source. So you could see companies that are making those resources deciding that, hey, we're going to continue to give you that open source license. We're just not going to continue to fund the infrastructure underneath it. Sorry. And, there's $1 trillion company out there that might want to kick in a few bucks to help with this thing. Secondarily, there is much room for improvement in terms of just making people aware that this is an issue, because most folks, when they know, will do the right thing. I would argue that most of the people who are probably abusing this stuff have no idea. And they're just kind of like
They
using it.
absolutely do. So here's the thing, Mike. You got to draw a distinction between open source software and open access, right? In the case of Sonatype, with all due respect, the 2 trillion pieces of Java code or JavaScript that they've got up there, they weren't written by Sonatype. They were written by people who contributed to a repository. Now, is all of that code open source? Yes. Is the repository itself open source? I don't think so. I think instead of crying in the beer about, woe is me, all these $1 trillion companies using my open source, they're not really using your open source. They're accessing open source software or open source code on your repository. So say, look, all the code in there is open source, but to use the ingress and egress of my repository, you have to have a paid account. It's a very simple thing. Now, you're going to piss off a lot of people because, Mike, they're not as naive as you think. They know exactly what they're doing, and it's open source, and they can. And you're going to piss them off, and you may or may not have a good business after that.
And Chris is going to burst. Go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead, Chris.
All right, I'm going to go against all precedent and agree with Mike, right? And don't get your expectations up. This is never going to happen again. But, Alan, everything I'm hearing from you is well-founded cynicism, right? You don't believe the companies, you don't believe what they say, you don't believe their motivations, you don't believe, and there's no reason to believe because you can't tell, right? And I think this sort of issue, I watched the episode. I don't exactly know how Sonatype's doing things, and maybe they're right or wrong, but if I can see myself being in that position where suddenly I start up a little company, now it's a big company, and I open source everything, and I find out that everybody's clicking on things that I shouldn't have set it up that way. I wasn't that mature. And I'm saying, look, I can't afford another data center to support this. And I have to ask, but there's no way for people to actually believe and see and know that. This is a lack of transparency at every level.
But again, I'm asking you, what? Go ahead, Kate.
I know, but I have to agree with Alan, being, from a true networking background, right? This, you start to see, these, egress and, ingress. And yeah, I mean, Alan's coming at it from a networking perspective. And you see this.
Yeah, I mean, what's Sonatype's open source software here?
No, Sonatype's providing a service. So I don't agree with anybody. Except you, Mitch, because I don't know what you said. I can't remember.
It was important, whatever it was.
Here's what you're all missing. Open source as a market has changed. It's changed significantly. Maybe even more than maybe it's changed radically in just the past 3-4 years. How so? It has invaded the commercial enterprise space. And I'm not talking about IT ops software. There's been tons of open source, infrastructure operations software and all that stuff going on. I mean that whether it's delivered through independent software vendors, software packages, or used by development teams in the enterprise, it has become a really big thing. And so the terms under which Sonatype and others have created their repos, made them open, are old terms that predate this kind of, accelerated adoption and use. And so that's really, in my sense, what is concerning Brian, even if or Sonatype, even if he's not stating it, which is we built this thing with a certain expectation, but now something else is happening. Now, Sonatype gets something extremely valuable out of making this a free, available service, which is they see who all the users are. They have all of those accounts. I don't know what agreement you have in order to set up the account as a repo or whatever, but you are a central market actor, if not a market maker. So I don't cry any crocodile tears for Sonatype here. And I think that they just need to, if they haven't already, they probably have, understand the value that they're getting back from doing this.
I'm going to do a Mike Vizard here. What makes me scratch my head about this one isn't this just like why are these IP addresses hitting our website so frequently? Where are they from? Who is it? What are they doing? Who do we block? Who do we reach out to? I mean, we've been dealing with this with networks since ping came about, right? It's the same. It's really the same issue. People over accessing a resource, and you have a couple of options about how you manage it, but you got to manage it. It's your resource, whether you're giving it away for free or it's part of your core business, and you charge for it. You see abuse, whether it's intentional or not. We've been doing this. Okay, yeah. Am I right here? Am I going down the right path as a network person?
But there's another aspect of the open source community that needs to be heard from, and that is the saints who freely give their code to these companies without any
more crocodile tears coming from me. Continue.
No. You know what? There's a lot of people who write JavaScript snips, Java code snips. There's a lot of people. I'll give you. Go away from Sonatype for a second. Let's go to GitLab, open source, CI/CD. Every month for the last 12 years, whatever it is, 10 years, 8 years, they release on the 22nd of the month a new version. And that version has new code in it. And not a lot, but some of that new code is code that was developed by members of the community and contributed to the project.
So Harvard Business Review did a study of this last year and found that something like 96% of enterprises are using open source, but only about 35% are contributing to it.
Yes, there's the parasite problem, but I'm talking about the people who do contribute code. Guy, they contribute that code without any expectation of being compensated. They do it because they want it to be available to everyone. Now, when they contribute it to a repo,
I think it's more complicated than that, Alan. But yeah, when they contribute, go ahead.
When they contribute this code, they're doing it under a license with the expectation that it's free and open.
And not an expectation that everybody's going to contribute. I'm not going to contribute to every piece of Linux code running on my server.
I've covered the open source business models for Mitchell knows, 25 years. The fact of the matter is, if you're very lucky, 3% of the people who play with your code in open source will at least report a bug. Right? Most open source projects, you could count on two hands, maybe 1 foot, the amount of people who actually contribute code to an open source project, except the biggest open source projects. That's the nature of this beast. Plain and simple.
And so, and you're okay with it, I guess. That's how it is. And I'm okay with it because these are passion projects for people, or they are building the name for themselves, or they are practicing, or they're getting something out of it. They're definitely paying. They're paying in their time, at least, time, sweat, and toil, if not in money.
Well, a lot of people have
to make this
monetized it.
contribution.
Sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know,
And the only reason I said it's more complicated, Alan, is because public institutions, as well as lots of private commercial ones, are paying salaries. If maybe not bonuses or things like that, but they're paying salaries for people to spend all of their time contributing to open source. And so those people's jobs and their salary and their career advancement is based on contributing
that's
to
a
open source.
relatively recent. So I've spoken about it before, but here's the deal.
I'm saying it's changed.
Yeah,
But
no,
go ahead.
it hasn't. So under Richard Stallman in that era of open source, kind of the cathedral and the bazaar, like the book, it was very much Wild Westy and more power to the man, down with the pigs, all that stuff. Then you had this big brother era of open source where you had like IBM supporting some great projects, and you know, basically an open source project had a benefactor. It was kind of like Renaissance Europe, right? Every artist had a benefactor who paid and really managed that open source project, but also did it for their own material benefit. And in many of those cases, the code contribution was by paid employees at an IBM or what have you. Then we moved into like the foundational era of open source, which is kind of where we are now. We have like Linux Foundation, CNCF, Eclipse Foundation, you know, who they have co-opetition between competitors who are all contributing to that open source. And it kind of makes it an even sea, and then you jump off from there, right? There are plenty of companies who contribute full-time, and not all IBMers too. I mean, you look, a company like Linkerd, a big mesh in CNCF, they support that project with full-time people. They also have a commercial business built around it. I think Sonatype's the same kind of situation.
So there's two ways to think about this. One is they could just give this to some consortium and let them figure out the cost of hosting all this stuff. And B, maybe they just need a better tax attorney to write this thing up.
You know, Sonatype, so look, Sonatype is a PE-owned company. They're a private equity-owned company. I think they got good tax accountants.
There you go. And that's why they're watching the pennies,
but
too.
I think that the key here is they probably need to put a toll booth at the door of the repo.
Well, so one second now. Just one fly in that ointment, let's say, which is this $1 trillion company. There's no reason they can't do, you know, firewall like inside the DMZ or DMZ-based caching, right? They're not doing that.
Who, you
There's
mean
this carrying
Sonatype,
cost.
you mean?
No, not Sonatype. The $1 trillion company that's doing
Why
1,000.
should they?
What my point is that that is a different. So they're. I think the fear here. I've been wanting to say this. The fear here is that rapacious capitalists are going to go in and just say, "Wow, free stuff. Go grab it. Make a few twiddles, and then you know, hey, it was open source."
But that's capitalism.
Yeah, that's been true.
No. I agree. Change in the market, change in the user base, change in how the open source market is going to have a reaction. We just haven't reached that.
You know what?
Yet.
My political science teacher in St. John's University told me something probably close to 40 years ago now. Communism's a great system if you have a society of atheistic saints. We're not communist, nor are we a society of atheistic saints. If people can get away doing something legally, they will. Mm-hmm. Here's the flip side of it. You know why Sonatype doesn't put a toll booth in on that repository? Because if they did, someone else will start a new repository.
And be a new center of gravity for Java, yes.
And there you go.
New center of gravity for open source Java.
I think they should try the pro model, $9.99 a month per user, premium access. There you go.
I'll just say, you know, we're obviously not going to solve this one right here, but I think Guy, you know, I wanted to say the same thing. Like, we need to recognize what people want and what they're trying to get out of it. And you know, I write open source because I feel like it. I want to dopamine rust. I want to get some experience. I want to get my name out there. I want to get paid for whatever it is, and actually reflect that. The systems we have right now, the problems we're having is because we're not always reflecting that, which Alan, may allow certain mechanisms like the normal capitalist impact to highlight the flaws of the system we're using. So if that stays that way for long term, then I guess that's fine, but I don't think it is. I think it's a combination of these things that, to sound like a broken record, allows transparency for everybody involved, the consumer and the producer and the open source contributors, so they can see whether or not it's being handled ethically and make their own choices. And that doesn't exist yet.
All right, we got to wrap it up. But let me just end it with this thing. What could be next? Socialized medicine? You're watching Texture and Gang. We're going to be back tomorrow with a lot more. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. As usual, stay tuned for Texture TV. Thank you for joining us on behalf of Guy and Mitchell and Chris and Mike and Kate on her first show. We hope we didn't scare her away with this one. You'll see more of her. This is Alan. We're out.